Well, now really, when we go back then to falling in love, falling, you see, we don't say rising into love. There is in it the idea of the fall. The life is an act of faith and an act of gamble. The moment you take a step, you do so on an act of faith because you don't really know that the floor is not going to give under your feet. Surrender. And love is an act of surrender to another person.
Through it all, miracle. Turn around and it feels like home. Look around and it feels like home.
So today, Sony just announced the brand new A1 Mark II. Now, I don't know how we got on this list, but somehow they asked if we could test this camera probably about a month ago. So they sent it out along with a brand new lens, the 28 to 70 millimeter f2 G Master. So between the camera and the lens, I think I was probably most excited about the lens. I'm not gonna lie. Like, the A1's a really good camera, and when they told us about the Mark II, you can imagine like it's just gonna be a better version of that, right? But the 28 to 70, the f2, it's a lens that is just so needed in the Sony lineup. Canon's had that lens for a while in RF form. There's just that much flexibility in focal length with that low of an aperture. Chef's kiss. Beautiful lens. Now, when it comes to the A1 Mark II, I had never used the A1 before. All I knew is it was like basically the top of the line Sony camera for hybrid shooters, just killing it in both photo and video. It's kind of like the Sony A7 IV, but on steroids. And the A1 is just known for having a super high resolution sensor, so 50 megapixels, 8K video recording, and then really good just autofocus, which makes it perfect for professional photographers and videographers. So now with the A1 Mark II, what's changed? Spoiler alert, not a lot. And frankly, I don't think every camera has to make some huge leap to be so much better than the previous version. I feel like they just kind of improved a lot of the minor issues with the first iteration and then added just a couple more features. Now, if you know me, you know I'm not really like a nerd when it comes to like the tech specs of a camera. I don't really get excited comparing the different spec sheets. I'm gonna tell you what's new here, but just so you know, this video was more of just a real world test. Like, as a camera, just in and of itself, not necessarily comparing it to the previous generation, but as a camera that you can buy right now with that lens, the 28 to 70 G Master, how does it perform? So we're gonna show you some test footage from this camera and just my experience using it for a day. We actually went up to Wyoming to film a spec commercial with this camera and the 28 to 70 G Master, just that camera lens combination. See what it could do. So in terms of what's new, I'm going to start with my favorite thing, which is the new 4-axis tilting screen. If you've used Sony for at least a few years, you know that there's the typical like tilt screen and that's all it does. Then there's the flip out screen. It articulates a little bit. In this body specifically, they have a 4-axis tilting screen. So you can basically maneuver it any which way you'd like to, which is really nice. So when I'm crouching down and getting a really low shot, I can just tilt it up. If I'm filming myself, I can flip it out. I think I'm just scarred from the C70 screen that is so unbelievably terrible. So whenever I come across a good tilt screen, I don't know, makes me happy. Now the sensor on this, it's still the 50.1 megapixel sensor, but now it has the Bion's XR image processing engines for better image quality at a mid to a high ISO. We'll show some sample footage on here so you can see what that looks like, how it performs. You also get a new AI processing unit for real-time recognition, autofocus with around 92% coverage. So basically what that means is that the autofocus system has improved dramatically, and now it's utilizing artificial intelligence to recognize subjects in your frame. And the technology, like, it's actually crazy. We got a quick demo of it when they were showing us the camera originally. And so to give you an idea, a typical autofocus system, if it's tracking your eyes, it's using your eye as a reference. It can do a pretty good job tracking your eyes. With this, with AI, it knows where your eye should be. So basically, if you have a helmet on or sunglasses or something that are covering your eyes, it can recognize the subject in your frame as a whole, and it can just guess roughly where that eye should be and keep that part in focus. Like that's what's insane, is we're kind of going beyond what's visually being seen by your sensor, and we're moving into really like crazy interesting processing and computing. Like it knows what should be in focus. It's hard to explain. You have to experience it. Another thing that's really cool with this new update is pre-capture. So kind of think of this as like when you take out your iPhone, right? And you go to take a photo. And when you take that photo, it actually records a video just before you hit the shutter button and just after you release the shutter button. Now, this isn't the exact same thing, but it's more or less what pre-capture does. It's continuously recording moments before the shutter is released from about 0.3 to 1 second. And then you pair that with the insanely fast 30 frames per second, just continuous shooting, full autofocus active, even in RAW. So if you're a photographer and you're doing a lot of action sports, like I'm telling you, this is the dream. This is a great camera for that. And then for my video shooters, you get 8K at 30 frames per second, and then 4K up to either 50 or 60 frames per second, depending on where you live, with 422 10-bit with breathing compensation, auto framing, framing stabilizer, and now you can actually import your own user LUTs. So if you're shooting in log, for example, you can import one of our free LUTs. I'll leave a download down below, and either bake that in or have it just be a display LUT so you can visualize a little bit better what your image looks like while you're shooting. You also get 1.5 more stops of stabilization. I couldn't really tell you if it's like significantly better than the previous model because we did not do a side-by-side comparison on this one. For the most part, during our filming, I had stabilization turned off. So, you know, if you are making an upgrade from an A1 to an A1 Mark II, you can expect slightly better stabilization. But if you were to just use one over the other, you probably wouldn't see a crazy big difference. Something really cool and like kind of unexpected on this camera was the microphone specifically dedicated to voice memos while you're shooting. So if you get a really good shot, you can actually record a quick voice memo of, I don't know, you could say, hey, this is a good shot, make sure you use this shot. Like you can basically just add little like footnotes to your footage and your photos. Unfortunately, I was so in the moment when I was shooting, I forgot that was even a feature, but the concept's pretty cool. And then finally, the last thing that I loved on this camera was their redesigned grip. It just felt good in the hand. That's all I could say. I don't know. Now let's talk about the lens, because like I said, this is probably the more exciting product between the two for me. So this thing is 32 ounces. It's 2 pounds. It's like 90 grams or something like that. I don't know. I'm American. I don't know grams. But if you compare it to Canon's RF 28 to 70, this thing is 11% smaller and then 36% lighter than that. That's still a big lens, by the way, but the RF is huge. So for this to be 36% lighter and then 11% smaller, that's a big deal. What's nice too is that it's not the type of lens where you zoom it out and then this huge piece like protrudes. Like it actually does most of the focusing internally. And you can say that about a lot of other lenses where if you zoom from a 28 all the way to a 70, it's going to get a lot heavier on the front. You might have to recalibrate your gimbal or just balance it with some center focal length. The thing is also super quiet, so it has linear motors, so it's silent when it comes to focusing. You get 2 customizable buttons. I tend to have one of them be actually a record button for vlogging. This would be a pretty decent vlogging lens, I think. It's kind of big, fair warning, but like just a good all-in-one lens. And the craziest thing I think has to be how sharp this lens is all along the edges, even at f2. And you can't say that about Canon's lens, no offense guys. And that's the biggest reason I've used prime lenses, at least more in the past, is because they're a lot sharper. You don't have to worry about all these moving pieces of glass inside of your lens, because variable zoom lenses tend to get a little softer. On this one though, don't even have to worry about it. So filming with this combo, it didn't feel foreign at all. It's a Sony camera. Like I said, this is basically an A7 IV on steroids. So handheld all day, switching off between standard, active, or just no stabilization, and then having that flexibility to switch between 8K at 24 frames per second or 4K at 60 frames per second, even did a little 120p as well. It just looks good. I think we've just reached a point when it comes to camera technology where there's not a huge difference in performance between the higher priced camera in the lineup and then the more affordable option. Yes, they're going to cut corners with those cheaper cameras, and you're going to get the little extra bells and whistles on the more expensive ones. But I think every filmmaker or content creator at some point comes to the realization that the camera itself doesn't matter nearly as much as the story, as the composition, as the lighting, as the camera movement. And that's exactly what we teach you inside of Full-Time Filmmaker. The alternative to film school. It's a fraction of the price. It's the best way to go from just total noob beginner trying to figure out how a camera works to seasoned vet. At any time you're hung up, you have me as a mentor, as well as tens of thousands of other filmmakers inside of our private Facebook group. So if you want to get started, I dropped a link below. Guys, thanks so much for watching. And as always, if you have any further questions, please let me know.